Hello, City of Port Aransas. We are here today for our Brown Bag Luncheon lecture, and I have a special guest here today who would like to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Jim Wilken, and I am a ham radio operator. I have been an amateur radio operator since I was 12 years old, and so that's been 50, 60 years now. Uh, Amateur radio, ham radio as it's called, is a really cool um, hobby. It is a hobby, and you can do today through technology pretty much anything you dream of. I've talked to ham radio operators who are 5 years old. I've talked to ham radio operators who are 100 years old, and so it's a really wide gamut of people who are interested in it. Uh, it used to be one of the requirements to get the license was Morse code, and that stopped a lot of people because they just couldn't get it. But that's no longer a requirement. There are three classes of amateur radio licenses. The technician, which is the first class, the general, which is pretty much what it says, it's a general license, and then the amateur extra, which is for the people that just want to go deeper into it. And each one of the classes does give you a little extra privileges, privileges as far as what frequencies you can use. For example, the technician, which is the entry-level class, and I want to stop and say that we've had a lot of people study to get their tech license in just a few days, so it's not difficult. It's a basic understanding of electronics and radio. It's a basic understanding of rules put forth by the Federal Communications Commission governing ham radio. And then as you go up, it gets a little more technical and a few more rules that you have to learn. But it's not difficult, and it's an awful lot of fun. You can talk to people around the world. As we say, give us 100 watts and a wire, we can talk to the world. And it's literally that. We set up sometimes for field day, which is one of the situations where we act like we're going to have an emergency, and we set up with nothing. We go out in the field, set up the radio equipment on battery power, generator power, solar power, and just hang up a wire. Sometimes we'll put up our trailer with a big tower and a big antenna on it. But you can talk around the world nowadays with a handheld, with a walkie-talkie. It's just gotten crazy the way that you can do things through the satellites. Matter of fact, all of the ham radio, all of the people who are astronauts have to be ham radio operators now. And so you can talk to the International Space Station. You can talk to the hams up there as it flies by. We recently put what's called a repeater up there that when they are flying by, it allows you to talk to other hams through the International Space Station. And so you can, as long as it's in line of sight, you can talk. So it's pretty cool. It's really neat to be able to talk to people in other countries. Most of them speak English. If you speak another language, that's an asset. But English seems to be the universal language for pretty much anything now. And so it allows us to talk all around the world. As far as, I've had a lot of people tell me that, oh, but it's got to be expensive. It can be. It cannot be. You can buy a radio for $100, a used radio that will allow you to talk around the world. Or you can spend $7,000 or $8,000 on a radio. It just depends on what you want to do and what your budget is. What we have set up here is an example of what I would consider pretty much a state-of-the-art radio system. This radio is one that is a high-frequency radio. The radio itself is a 100-watt radio, and then we have it going through an amplifier that boosts it up to 600 watts. The most that you can use as a ham radio operator is 1,500 watts. And so You don't really need that. You can talk around the world on 5 watts if you need to. Um, the more power, the easier it is, obviously. But that's a lot of fun. This is a VHF, UHF radio, which is kind of up in where you find the public service frequencies in that, and yet you can still talk around the world on it.
Ham radio operations, at least that's my understanding, so that makes it fascinating.
And that is someone who I believe I noticed a minute ago is in Australia, and you can tell a little bit from his accent, but it's crystal clear, and you can do that same thing on a walkie-talkie, and so it's really a cool cool hobby. After Hurricane Andrew and Hurricane Katrina, a lot of the communications that was left was ham radio, and because of that, a lot of the emergency management people started requiring their employees to get ham licenses. That's fine. If emergency communications is what you're into, that's great because we certainly need that. I was raised in a fire station in Nacogdoches, and so that's always been an issue, something close to my heart. And so I am the district radio officer for the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service here. And that's one of the things we do is we provide backup communications for the state and for the city and for anyone who asks us. And our primary job is to communicate between the Emergency Operating Center and the State Operating Center in Austin. Then we have the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES as it's called, and that's more of a communications between, say, the hospitals and the city EOC and wherever we need it, whenever we're needed, and that's it. Whoever calls us and says, we need communications, then amateur radio is here to provide that communication. And so that's certainly a part of it. The other part of amateur radio, it really goes where you want. We can do television, which most people don't realize, but we can do slow scan TV, which is more like digitizing a picture. It's not actually moving. It's a picture that you put up there. I could just have a picture here, hit transmit, and it would digitize it and send that out to whoever on the other end was watching or talking to me. The space station does a lot of slow scan television. Then we have fast scan television, which is more of a local thing, but it's just like you're sitting there talking to somebody on TV. You see them just like you're watching them on TV, they see you. It's a little more complex to set that up, and we don't have very many people here in this area that do that. Right now, we are in the process of recovering from a couple of events. One is the Channel 6 tower collapse. So they lost their tower, and with it, 4 of the amateur radio repeaters that were on the tower went away. And so we're trying to get those back up in various places where we can make an agreement with them to put it. We've got a tall tower that's agreed to let us go back on it. And so that's in the process. We have a couple of buildings, the taller buildings that we are trying to get facilities on. And these repeaters allow you to take your walkie-talkie and talk for, say, 60 miles in the area, which is very handy for, we do beach to bay, help them with their communications. And of course, in any emergency, like a storm, let's face it, down here, storms are our major priority. And so we will end up doing communications for that. But we're recovering from Hurricane Harvey, which took down all of our repeaters in Port Aransas. And we have one repeater back up in Port Aransas and a couple of others that we're trying to find a location there. There are clubs here, the Corpus Christi, the South Texas Amateur Radio Club, and the Coastal Bend Amateur Radio Club, which is more centrally located out of Portland in Rockport in that area, and Port Aransas. And the clubs will help you get your license. It will help you get together with other hams. It's a social, the original social distancing thing. You know, we're away from them, but we're talking to them, so it's a lot of fun. And it can be digital, where you hook your computer up to the radio, and it's just like, for instance, if the internet fails here during a hurricane, we can hook our radios up to our computers and hook up to the internet, say in New York City, and then we can send our emails through them when everything else is down here. There's a saying that we use, which is, when all else fails, ham radio. And that's really true. It's been that way from the get-go. A lot of people want to know, why is it ham radio? Well, back when amateur radio was starting in the, I'm saying probably the early 20s, there were three guys that had the radio station set up for one of the big colleges up in New York. And at the time, it was just amateur radio. And as they did the news stories on it, they would use these guys' initials, H-A-M. I don't recall their names, but that was it. And so they just started calling it ham radio. And that's how ham radio got its name. But there are two or three other stories floating around, but that seems to be the one that makes the most sense of all the ones that I've read and looked into. And so whatever your interest in communications, whether it is very technical, very digital, or just getting on the radio and talking to people. And a lot of people still use Morse code, but we call that the original digital communication. And so whatever your interest, there is a portion of amateur radio that we can certainly cultivate your interest in and find someone to help you get there. And it depends on what you want to do with your life too. I started in ham radio when I was 12 years old. When I was 15, I started hanging out with a disc jockey at one of the stations who was also a ham radio operator. And so that got me into broadcasting, and I've spent my life in broadcasting because of ham radio, turned it into a career. And so a lot of people do that, and a lot of people don't. And we have a lot of hams that have gotten into it when they retired and were just looking for a hobby. And it is a very cool hobby. And that is the other thing, is it is primarily a hobby. The emergency communications, the fact that a lot of the police departments, Portland for example, are putting in amateur radio systems, and a lot of their officers are ham radio operators, makes it easier in an emergency situation when everything else is down. They have people ready to grab onto ham radio and go. But that's just a part of it. Like I say, whatever your interest, you can sit down and talk to people. That's what I like to do. Code is cool. Getting on the computer is cool. But you can do that on the internet. And I just like to sit down and talk to someone. And it's a lot of fun.
You mentioned your broadcasting. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the broadcasting that I got into was as a disc jockey. And then as I learned more about electronics, I ended up being an engineer for some of the stations. But primarily my radio career was as a DJ. I was a DJ for 30 years on most of the stations around this area and a few out of town. And then I got into the engineering aspect of it, which is a lot of fun. And nowadays, it's not as technical as it used to be, where we would go in and when something went out, you would get in there and change the resistors, capacitors, and all of that, and really fix things. Now, a lot of it is modular. And I'm now working for a television company. We have have 18 channels here in the coastal bend. And when something goes out now, you pull out a little module and stick in the new module, and it's done. And so it makes it a lot easier and a lot faster. And of course, they are more interested in getting on the air fast, and so that helps. But that, as an engineer, you don't need to know quite as much as you did back in the old days when you're really getting in there with your soldering gun and fixing things. Same way with ham radios. Back in the early days, we built our own equipment. You could always go out and buy it, but you could buy a kit, or as you learn things, you could actually get a box and components and put it together and build it yourself. Those days are pretty well going to the side now. Most everybody is buying a commercial radio, mainly because you plug it in, turn it on, you're ready to go. And then you can learn as you stay in ham radio. You can learn more and more and more if that's your interest. A lot of people want to get into it and just talk, and some people call it a glorified CB radio, which in a point I can see that. I started with CB radio too, but then with this you can legally talk around the world, and it's a ton of fun. Obviously, you can tell that he is a foreigner. And with D-Star, it will, when he comes up, it will give you his location and call letters. And so DM8ET is his call letters, and DM is Germany. And so on a handheld, crystal clear, you can talk to Germany.
That is near the city of Lübeck, and that's also part of Schleswig-Holstein, the northernmost state of.
So there are several different kinds of modes that you can use. That was called D-Star. There's another one called DMR, which is digital mobile radio, and it does the same thing. It still allows you to talk all around the world with it. Some of these are linked through satellites. Some of them are linked through the internet. We'll have a repeater. There's a repeater in Ingleside that is linked to the internet, and through that you can talk all around the world. We have a repeater on the USS Lexington. We have the radio room on the Lexington is set up with amateur radio equipment, and the club here maintains that. So when you go take the tour, you can take a look at the radio room, see what it looked like in the day. And if you're a ham radio operator, you can actually sit down and operate the radios. We have them set up so you can operate them. And you want to, we call it a pile-up, where there's a bunch of stations trying to talk to you. Just sit down there and say that this is W5LEX on the USS Lexington. I'll guarantee you, you'll get a pile-up immediately, because everybody wants to talk to the ship. And so that's kind of a cool aspect. And you don't have to be a member of the club. We just maintain the radios. You just need to let us know you would like to operate them, and we'll have somebody down there to open up the radio room and let you in and operate it. So it's a lot of fun. We get a lot of guys that actually served on the Lexington who are now hams that will come down and go in and operate the radios. And that's cool. There are a lot of famous people who are ham radio operators. There have been a lot of media people you see on TV all the time. There are a lot of musicians. Ronnie Millsap is a ham. A couple of the girl singers are hams. Just it goes on and on. And for instance, Last Man Standing, they have ham radio set up. You see in the back of their shots when Tim is doing his parts. Well, they actually operate that ham station. Tim, several of the other actors, and the producers of Last Man Standing are ham radio operators. And so while they're doing that, before they do the filming, they'll get on the air and talk to hams for a little while. And this is called a QSL card. We don't get as many as we used to now because of the internet, but you'd have a card with your call letters on it, and when you talk to somebody, then you would exchange QSL cards, which shows that you've talked to them. And I kept some of the better and more interesting ones that I've talked to, the Queen Mary, and the NASA has a club in Houston at NASA, and just various ones from around the world that I've talked to. I don't keep them all, but I kept the ones that are more interesting to me anyway. And so it's pretty cool. This is another aspect of ham radio. And something else, when you really get into it, you might want to be a volunteer examiner and help give the ham test. Back in the early days, the Federal Communications Commission examiners would come around and give you your test, and then as budget constraints took a lot of the wind out of the FCC sails as far as number of people that they had employed, they reached out to the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL, and said, help us give the test. And so you do a little studying yourself just to see how to give the test, and then become a volunteer examiner. And then it takes 3 volunteer examiners to get together to give the exams. And so we do that. We try and do it once a month down here. It depends on how many people have expressed an interest. And if you are interested and you want to know about getting a ham radio license, the gentleman here that oversees that is James Ermis, and his email address is ad5tc@arrl.net. And you can send him an email at that address, and he'll get right back to you and tell you when the next exam session is going to be. If you are interested in ham radio in general and want to know how to get your license, there are a lot of people here at the clubs. You can contact me, Jim Wilken, and my email address is n5vl@outlook.com. And then there's some other people in the area that, you get in touch with them. Any ham can link you up with somebody that's willing to help you study, help you get the license. One of the other fun parts of ham radio is contesting. We have contests every month for various things, and then there are certificates. I wouldn't call them prizes, but there's something that's prized to you if you do it. Like, for instance, getting a certificate for working every state in the country, for working every country in the world, for working every continent in the world, and then for working, say, 100 foreign countries. It's called a DXCC. And so there are a lot of little awards that you can get like that. We do have contests where you see how many people in a certain section of the world you can talk to. There's a contest going on this weekend that's generally an open contest, which it's called a CQ contest, where it's just how many people can you talk to over the weekend. It's generally a 24-hour period from noon Saturday to noon Sunday. And that's what we have going on today. A lot of people just trying to see how many people they can talk to.
Great copy on you. Doing a great job. Radio sounds fantastic. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. I do like that picture on your QRZ page. Very nice. You're solid 5'9" here. What are you running? Right now I'm running the Kindle TS 990 with an Alpha 87. Probably doing about 1,300 watts. I do have a hog center fed dipole in the backyard, maybe 35 feet in the air. Okay, well, all working well. A little bit of QSB there, but I think fan conditions are probably the problem there. Okay, well, thanks very much. I'll say 7-3. I hope everything's good your end and you're fit and well, and remain that way. This is Victor 3-1, Zulu Alpha in Belize, and we'll be here with Kilo 4, Mike Whiskey on your front.
Okay, Gee, thanks for coming back to my call. You have a great day. Stay safe. And your radio sounds fantastic. Catch you later. 7-3, K4WW, clear with Victor 31, Zulu Alpha.
So that is a station in the southeast part of the country talking to a station in Belize. And a lot of fun.
Amateur radio, also known as ham radio, is a popular service and hobby that enables so many activities, from public service to scientific experimentation to sheer fun. With more than 740,000 practitioners in the U.S. and 1.75 million worldwide, there are federally licensed amateur radio operators everywhere, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, and in your schools. People just like you use ham radio to communicate without relying on the internet or a cell phone network. And it can go wherever you go. You can hike a trail, climb a mountain, or paddle a river, and take your radio with you. Ham radio even reaches as far as outer space. Ham radio operators can talk to astronauts aboard the International Space Station, talk to other operators through satellites orbiting Earth, and even bounce their radio signals off the moon and back. The amateur radio service is a valued element of neighborhoods and municipalities across the U.S. In times of disaster, when regular communications channels fail, the amateur radio service works with public service agencies such as FEMA, the American Red Cross, and the Salvation Army to assist emergency communications efforts. Amateurs can also use their radios to volunteer within their communities, providing communications for events like county fairs, parades, and road races. Although people get involved with amateur radio for many reasons, they all pass a test to earn the Federal Communications Commission license that shows they have a basic knowledge of the principles of electricity, radio technology, and operating rules. This knowledge has practical everyday applications that educators have used to teach science, technology, engineering, and math concepts. Lots of hams got into the hobby as kids and followed their interest in radio to exciting careers as astronauts, engineers, pilots, and more. The ham radio frequencies begin just above the AM broadcast band and extend into extremely high microwave frequencies. Ham radio operators use these frequencies to communicate with each other using microphones, Morse code, and even by interfacing a radio with a computer or tablet to send data, text, or images. Some compete in contests, trying to make the most radio contacts within a certain time frame. Amateur radio has been around for over 100 years, and the technology behind it continues to evolve and advance today. Operators are always finding new ways to explore amateur radio, experimenting with digital applications of this technology through things like coding, mobile apps, and drones. To learn more about the endless possibilities of amateur radio, where the technology is headed, and how you can get involved, visit ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, at www.arrl.org.
We would love to have you join the ranks of amateur radio operators worldwide. It's a lot of fun. You can talk to famous people and not so famous people. A good place to start would be the website for the South Texas Amateur Radio Club. And that website is www.n5crp.net. And check it out. It'll give you links to learn everything about it, links to have people that would help you. Or like I say, feel free to get in touch with me, n5vl@outlook.com.